Hi, guys. Welcome to A Little Help for Our Friends, a podcast for people with loved ones struggling with mental health. Hey, little helpers. It's Dr. Kibby, and I have a huge announcement for you. After several wonderful years of really meaningful conversations, A Little Help for Our Friends is entering a new chapter. My co host, Jacqueline Trumbull, has decided to step away from the podcast to focus on new directions. So, today is going to be different. It's my first solo episode. I'm talking to myself in a void, which is really weird. And I'm going to talk about all that we've built here, this community, this podcast. I'll give a little bit of insight on what it was behind the scenes. And then I'm going to talk about this next era of A Little Help for Our Friends. We're still going. I'm going to take up the mantle and I'm going to try to do Jacqueline proud and take this forward for all of you. So, this podcast has been a really special thing for both me and Jacqueline, and a lot of you who have been so nice telling us that you're listening, telling us how you've helped us in some way by listening to maybe one of our stories where we were going through something similar to what you were. So, this has been just an amazing, amazing experience. And it's I mean, I can't get around that. I'm feeling really sad today. I tried to record this a bunch of times, and every time I did, I ended up crying or just getting so tired and unable to really gather my thoughts to do this. So I have to acknowledge that this is a mourning period and this is grieving a loss. It was pretty hard to do this podcast over the years. I mean, Jacqueline and I have been through so many different things. We started when it was like in the middle of COVID. I think it was 2020, about 5 years ago. Oh, God, I can't believe that. So, the reason why we started this podcast is because I got a grant for my dissertation, and the grant required me to do some kind of community outreach to make science accessible to the broader public outside of academia, which I loved, which was something that I've been dying to do. But really didn't know where to start. I mean, I had been an academic, I had been a psychologist, and I'll talk more about this, but I have really identified as someone who's just like the nerd behind the scenes, right? So someone who um, gets the whole stage together, but is not actually on the stage. So doing any kind of public outreach or communication seemed really scary to me, but I thought, okay, let me maybe a blog. What am I going to do? And that's when Jacqueline came into our program, and she had experience with podcasts through The Bachelor, and we liked the same things. We liked talking about personality disorders and relationships. So she was like, let's just do a podcast. So it really was just like a fun thing for us to do together. It was just a fun project. We didn't really think much of it or where it was going to end up. And we started in COVID, and I remember that we had a script and we were so nervous. We actually had to record that one episode like 5 different times. Reading, we wanted to be so professional. We read everything and like describe different dialectical behavioral therapy skills to deal with the pandemic, like improve the moment and distress tolerance and stuff. We wanted to be like good students. And so the reason why we put on this podcast is because at Duke, there was this program called Through Thick and Thin for family members and loved ones of people with mental illness and emotion dysregulation. And that was so cool. That was something that we really resonated with. And we wanted to grow this community. We wanted to reach people who couldn't just come into those classes at Duke. And we did. It was just like this interesting angle of centering the loved ones, the caregivers, supporters in the story instead of the identified patient. And it really clicked with a lot of people. I think that us, Jacqueline and I both have, we've talked about this a lot, but I have a lot of mental health and addiction history in my family. My mom struggled with alcoholism and other emotional issues, and Jacqueline's family has also struggled with that too. And us being like the psychologists, the ones who are like less crazy, less less out of control, we were always seeing our story through the lens of these other people who need more help, right? Like um looking back on the struggles and traumas of our childhood as like someone else was going through a trauma and we were witnessing it. But yet it was still our experience. So that was really confusing. And so when we started talking about how mental health is a community illness, a relational illness, that really resonated with a lot of people. So doing the podcast, at first we were like, okay, let's just get skills out there. Let's just get, some information that we know from science and clinical work and try to spread it to a broader community. And it became something so much more than that, at least for me. I'm speaking for myself. This whole episode, I'm speaking for myself. What we noticed was resonating with our audience, with you guys, is getting more personal, getting more vulnerable, bringing in real stories. So we bring in stories from our listeners or our friends. I want to make this clear, whenever we talk about patients, our patient work, confidentiality and privacy is number one. So actually, when you hear us saying, oh, we have a patient who blah, 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 we're actually changing almost all of the identifying information, so that, sometimes when we said a friend or, a patient, we were meaning different things, and we're kind of, we did everything we could to protect people's privacy. So I want to say that if we ever share the story, you share your story out here, it was intentionally hidden in a way that would protect you. So people really liked hearing real stories. All these, I see this on social media, all this like talk about what trauma is and what gaslighting is, and person and narcissists, they're so evil. But it really seems almost kind of like, fairy tale language, like so general, right? It's like almost like this villain of the story and how to detect them and how to understand trauma and mental health, right? But lived experiences really were the things that resonated for people, because I was like, oh, that's what I've experienced. Oh my God, I didn't realize I was in an abusive relationship, right? So as we noticed that the stories were resonating with people, that's when we started to get more personal ourselves, right? And we would tell about our dating, our dating history and all of our mistakes. And it got into the point where we're talking about, my childhood trauma, stuff that I was processing in real time. I mean, in this past season, there's a self-hatred episode, in season 5, where I was so triggered with my own childhood trauma, that we were going to record something entirely different that night, and we decided to talk about that because I had been healing from cancer, and I was surprised to see that all my childhood stuff was just like coming flooding in ways I didn't expect. So, so in many ways, this podcast became like therapy, in a different way, um, and a way to connect to you guys and to each other in ways that we haven't before. Like I didn't experience that in other spaces. So it became really special. And it was hard. There was a lot of downsides to it. I mean, the amount of legal clearance we needed to get from Duke, and to have a disclaimer at the end to say that this is just information, it's not therapy, and to protect patient information. But also, just we were talking about our real lives. So there were people who we were talking about that were affected and listening, right? Like our family members, our friends, all the things that we were struggling with. I mean, we had to bring in here. Like I went through a divorce. Jacqueline went through a really difficult relationship. I mean, it was crazy. She broke off the engagement, but we still all had the flights to the wedding. So we all went to Portugal and had like a non-wedding there. And then both of us got into new relationships. And then I had a baby and I had cancer. And all of that is documented in this podcast. It really is such a cool diary of a friendship, and diary of a crazy changing time in our lives. I'm so grateful. I mean, anyone who's thinking about starting a podcast, do it. Even if it's just for yourself to vlog, I recommend. But I would say it was really hard. There was a lot of parts of it that were really difficult. The first thing is that we were trained to be psychologists who keeps everything under wraps, right? Like the old psychoanalysis model, the old Freudian model. It's like you literally are behind a person while they're lying down doing therapy. They don't see you. You're like a voice in their head intentionally. You're supposed to be a non-person, a blank slate, so that patients can just project all of their stuff onto you, right? So the tradition of psychology is like you're like as a therapist, you're a non-person. And I'm very good at being a non-person in many ways. Like that is something that I've gotten very used to. Um, so even stepping into this podcast was a step in the direction of I am stepping out from behind the scenes. I am exposing myself in ways that was really risky. Like people, like my patients and people I work with, they can listen to details of my divorce. They could listen to what I went through as a child. They, all the mistakes I made in my last marriage and um, what it was like to go through chemo. I mean, that's all stuff that normally I wouldn't even show any of my patients. And now people can listen to it in depth. So, I mean, a lot of people criticized it. A lot of people thought that that was non-professional, that was a risk, that was a problem for patients. And we kept doing it anyway because we really did feel the impact of it on some of you. And I think that psychology is reaching a new era where no longer do we trust a blank slate anymore, right? Well, maybe AI isn't. AI, ChatGPT is like the new blank slate, like the new Freudian psychoanalysis, but people want to connect to people. And because we're behind screens all the time, we want to see into each other's lives. We want that human connection more than ever. And I feel like every time I shared something really personal and got really vulnerable, people trusted me more. I'm sure some people trusted me less, but there were many people who reached out and said, thank you for sharing that. I've been through something similar. I've had similar struggles. And to just connect to that made them feel really seen. And that's all I ever want. That's all I ever want in this life is for people to feel seen. I don't achieve that all the time, but I try. That's my main goal. I have chronic issues not feeling seen. And that feeling of someone you care about or someone you trust reflecting your own experiences back to you, there's no other feeling like that in the world for me. And I know for other people. So if this helps people feel seen, I'm willing to do it. Now, there have been a lot of problems with it. For example, um, I'm not going to go into so many of the details because this is more Jacqueline's story, but the part that is my story is that we did talk a lot about her breakup throughout the podcast with her ex-fiance. And it really was kind of like revealing the levels of abuse in real time. Like at first we were all excited about it, and then slowly it revealed itself to be a really unhealthy relationship for many reasons. And you could listen to old episodes to hear that. And this was her space. So, we've had episodes about her talking about the breakup, breaking off the engagement. And we knew that, for example, her ex and probably her ex's family members were listening to it. So we really wanted to be respectful and talked more. She would talk way more about her own problems, her own stuck points, what she did wrong and what it was like for her. And still we got shit for it. I'll read you a little email that I got from the ex. And this is directly to me, so I feel like I have the right to read it out loud, and I'm probably going to get in trouble for this, but I don't care. It says, and this is when I was fully pregnant, right? This is, I think I was in second trimester, so I was fully pregnant. I'm supporting my friend through this horrible breakup, which, had different ripple effects throughout our friend group, right? Like everyone was upset. We're talking on the phone a lot, like getting calls from her friends and family. And then I get this email. I'll read just part of it. So, hey, Kibby, before entering a legal battle that I'd rather avoid, I figure I'd give you the opportunity to remove from your podcast the 2 more recent episodes on how to spot a narcissist and on my breakup with Jacqueline. My lawyer, John Esposito, parentheses, who's Bill Clinton's lawyer too, and means business, is keen on sending you and Jacqueline a cease and desist order, and is also keen on initiating a lawsuit for defamation. He thinks it's a particularly strong case given that A, it's clear that you're referring to me in the narcissist episode, and B, Jacqueline was on The Bachelor, which means she's got a lot of clout. I asked him to hold off on any legal action for the time being, noting that I'd first email you and attempt to avoid a legal battle. Though I should note he's on a retainer, so I have him for as many hours as I need at no additional cost. Okay, so that was the risk of doing this podcast. I mean, that email was just so insane. I felt like it triggered so many things in me. I was pregnant. I was so emotionally charged up. I was like shaking. I was really scared to feel attacked like that. And to be clear, the how to spot a narcissist was not referring to him. I mean, we didn't mention his name. We talked about like past people, but he certainly read himself into that. So, so we had to take those episodes down, and it was really scary. And it was so frustrating because he was bullying us, and I just love that he's built Clinton's lawyer means business. I still kind of like make fun of that line, means business. So yeah, I mean, there were a lot of risks with putting out these episodes, and not only that, it was hard to do logistically. I mean, Jacqueline and I have lived in all these different places. I think we started when I was in New York and she was in Durham, uh, and then we had moves. Like she moved to New York. I had a baby, got sick. Right, these past few years since COVID, we were all over the place, and we would bring our podcast equipment to trips. I remember going to Coachella and sitting on the floor of my hotel room, waiting for a quiet moment, and getting out all my podcast equipment and doing the episode on the floor. And we've done it abroad. We've done it like all over the place. So it was really hard to figure out logistically, and especially as soon as I had a kid. I mean, I know that people are afraid that your lives change when you have a kid, and that's a really valid concern. This is what I say to my patients and people who say, "Oh, I'm so scared, like things are going to change when I have a kid." And I'm like, "Yeah, that's a really real fear." That's like, I'm super validating. It is. That is 100% true. Your life will change. Um, and it changes friendships. And I think it was a big difference between us. Like I could kind of feel it. I went through postpartum depression, but I could feel that my life was so different. My reality was so different from my friends like Jacqueline who didn't have kids. We prioritized things differently. My energy was different. I had less patience for things. And, just the kind of the flow and the flexibility and the fun spontaneity that we did this podcast was much harder for me when I had, like, let's say, a baby in the next room that I was trying to put down so that I could record. So that was tough. That was really tough, and I can't believe that we had a lot of arguments about stuff like that, and we worked through it and kept going, adjusting to less frequent episodes. But I did this podcast while going through chemo. I was like losing my hair. I was nauseous. I was weak. I thought I was going to die. And yet we still showed up here. And it's interesting to think about what's going to happen without Jacqueline. And I think it's less about the podcast and more like what happens when you have a major transition in a friendship. When someone's a narcissist or when someone is anxious attachment, and we want to categorize people into something, right? Like you are a this kind of person. But the more that we've talked about these topics on this podcast of relationships and the more that Jacqueline and I had worked together, it really seems more like we are co-creating dynamics and we are creating identities in a relationship. I was a type of person in my dynamic with Jacqueline, and in ways that I wasn't that kind of person when I wasn't around her. You get pigeonholed in these little roles, right? These really specific one note roles where one of our one of our listeners, I hope you're listening to this, she said that our dynamic was like Adam Carolla and Dr. Drew on Loveline, and they have new podcasts. So that duo talks about uh, sex questions and all these kind of things, like with for men. But Adam Carolla is like the funny, charismatic, loud one, and then Dr. Drew is like the more serious, nerdy, brainy one. So I remember I went to Jacqueline and I said, you know that our listeners think that I'm the Dr. Drew and you're the Adam Carolla. And she was like, do I want to be the Adam Carolla? And I was like, do I want to be the Dr. Drew? It's so funny to think that our identities are in relation to the people around us. That's what identity is. An identity is how you position yourself and are seen in a community, in relationships. I know that we want to figure out who we are, without any external validation, but that is not realistic. We grow up with other people. My identity is how I defined me and my qualities and my behaviors and choices compared to someone else, right? Um, and my identity with Jacqueline was this Dr. Drew or this more serious version. The first thing that popped in my mind was Bert and Ernie. Like I'm the Bert and she's the Ernie, which is just so sad. But I was like the nerdy one and she was the fun one. Like I was like she was the pretty one and I was the like loyal best friend kind of thing. At least that's how I saw myself in our dynamic. That dynamic had its advantages, right? When you have a duo like that, you have complementary personalities, but it also pigeonholes you into a role, right? I'm sure that all of you in your family, when you go home to your family, you are like the hero of the family or the scapegoat or the funny one or anything else. And then when you're with your friends, you might be a completely different person. And I feel like over time that podcast, or at least our dynamic, put us in those boxes of, the fun one and the nerdy one, even though both of us have a blend of both. She told these fun, silly stories, colorful stories, and I was a little bit more self-deprecating and gave a little bit more of the information. But I think over time, I'm speaking for myself, Jacqueline, if you're listening, I think over time that really hurt us. I think it hurts people to be put in specific roles and identities and boxed into only one thing. I never really let myself develop other parts of me, especially in this podcast, which I will, and I'll talk about what that means for the podcast. But it almost became like I became a character. I didn't become Kibby, my full self. And the same thing for her. And I think that it makes sense that she wants to move on to other things. She's starting a new life in North Carolina with a lovely fiance, and she's going to private practice. So her life is going to look a lot different than all the stories she shared of dating in New York and all that and going on The Bachelor. Her life is just very different. And it makes sense that she wants to make room for that and to be seen differently than she used to. And same for me. I mean, it is really terrifying to do this. for a number of reasons. And you guys who have reached out and talked to us about your stories, we could hear a theme of people who really care for the people around them, identify as caregivers or nurturing people, or the moms or dads, the empaths, people pleasers, the people who we call like the emotional anchor of the family, who hold everything together, right? So everyone else can stay afloat. And I certainly identify with that. I think my best qualities are my ability to read other people, my ability to see other people and what they're trying to tell me and what they feel, try to figure out how to make someone happy, right? And so much of my life, I've looked down on myself for that. Like I'm proud because I know it's a skill and ability, but I also devalue myself for that. So there's a real conflict around the ability to see and lift and support other people. Being other oriented is bad in the society. At least this is how I feel. I feel like at the same time, like academia and psychology and places like here, I usually feel most useful when I could lift someone else up. Like people like me more. The people in my life love me more. This is part of my core belief, and it's a limiting belief, but it's almost like the more I can lift someone up, the more valuable I am to them, which of course makes sense. But what that means is that I have put myself behind the front man all the time. I'm constantly looking for people who have charisma and are easily bring attention to themselves and who could stand in the room and flirt and seduce the room and draw the attention to them, right? Often they are narcissists or histrionic or something, but there's something about that personality that I'm drawn to because I'm really good at letting someone else fill the space. And they love to fill the space and they do it well. I used to be a photographer, right? I'm a psychologist. I create the space for other people to shine. And so it's really challenging for something like this, where now I have to step out of that dynamic. I have to step out from behind the stage and get on the stage and center myself in the story, which is the whole point of this podcast, is for the people who are caregivers and supporters to be seen as the main character of the story. So it's a real meta journey that we'll all go on. And I'm really terrified because I'm like, what if people just came to listen to Jacqueline's fun stories, or she was a charming one and I'm the boring one? Like, what does that mean? And I won't know until I take that risk, right? I can't tell all of you to be your authentic selves and validate yourself and prioritize yourself in difficult relationships when I'm not doing the same. So that will be the new chapter of A Little Help for Our Friends. It's still going to focus on how do we heal mental health through connection, right? Let's focus on mental illness and addiction and all of these emotional pain as something that's happening within a family, within a group, within a community, right? It's not just one person suffering from mental illness. It's really a sickness in a system, right? I want to keep focusing on that and really understanding, how do we build family? I don't just mean biological family, but I mean family in all sense of the word. How do we build secure attachments to the people in our lives, right? We are so lonely these days. We spend so much time on our phones looking at windows into other people's constructed fake lives, and we're not feeling that connection, right? We're not feeling seen. We're only feeling seen through the through the glass. And people are confused more than ever. How do you actually build a family and a connection? Is it all about just going no contact and breaking off and just being yourself. Well, sometimes that's necessary in order to find yourself and to differentiate yourself. But what does it actually mean to build healthy, connected, loving, secure relationships? That is something we'll continually focus on in this podcast. And I'm going to bring out more sides of me. I haven't really talked a lot about my years in Berlin. I haven't talked a lot about my years as a yoga teacher and a Thai massage therapist who was over in a rice paddy in Thailand working with people from all over the world. Um, I haven't told some of my crazier stories because I intentionally, maybe not intentionally, but subconsciously hid them because I was like, I'm not the fun one. Right? I'm only gonna tell a crazy story if it's something that um, is like a lesson or something self-deprecating, but I'm not gonna tell just like a funny dating story. But I have so many of those. So there's just gonna be a lot more of different aspects of my life and my deep lifelong journey of trying to understand connection. Um, I'll talk a lot more about that. We're going to have amazing guests. We're going to we notice that people are interested in understanding narcissistic abuse, nervous system, the neuroscience behind attachment, family dynamics, and how to actually communicate well, set boundaries, and find yourself and regulate your own emotions. So I will have tons of guests for that. Um, because I also have all these friends in like neuroscience and film and entertainment and all these places that I haven't pulled in yet. So that's going to be a really exciting chapter. And as always, the reason why I did this, the reason why I did any of this podcast is to build a community, is for people who feel alone and unseen to feel connected and seen. So Cool Mind, I've mentioned that a bunch of times, but Cool Mind is the community that we built for you, our little helpers. It is a course, really. It's an online course where I teach keep saying we. It's so hard to change that habit, but I'll just start saying I. Ugh. I built Cool Mind so people like you can have a place and connect to each other and learn the skills that I teach on this podcast um, in a community with other people struggling with the same things. So I'll always talk about Cool of Mind here, but just if you're ever curious, just look on our website, coolamind.com, KULAMIND.com. This podcast is considered the official podcast of Cool of Mind, and I'm never going to have any other ads on this podcast. I really don't like hearing ads, but I'm going to constantly give updates about this Cool of Mind community, and I want all of us to grow together. So I want this to be something for you. I want you to feel seen. So if you want to give us your story, God, give me your story. If you want to give me your story, if you want to give me questions to tackle, requests for topics that we haven't covered, complaints, I want to hear complaints. Actually, I've found that the people who have reached out to me and said, hey, the thing that you talked about was so offensive. It didn't give the whole picture. It didn't represent my experience. Those have been the best conversations because that's where I'm like, yeah, thank you. I do this to learn about a lot of different topics that I haven't delved into myself. So I want to know where I'm missing, right? I'm kind of putting out what I can read on my own or what I think on my own, but I want to hear from you. What am I missing? Please tell me. So you could always email me at kibby@coolamind.com, KAIBBY at coolamind, KULAMIND.com. Or there is a feature in the show notes that all the way at the top, it says send me a text. Just click on that and it'll just let you send a message. I can't really respond back to that for some reason. So if you want me to engage in a conversation with you, email is the best, or you could put your email there. But please, I want to hear from you. I want to feature you as the center of this podcast, which you always were, but let's learn how to be seen together. So I'm so excited for the next chapter. I'm also mourning the loss of the 5 beautiful years that I had with Jacqueline. I wish her the very best. I have utmost respect for her and love for her. And I also want to say that I held on to this dynamic in this podcast with her for even when it was hard because it was the place I felt most connected to her. And I'm being really honest with that. I have a hard time letting myself have the space, emotional space in relationships. And I feel like it was the time where we can talk most in depth and slow down and give each other that attention, right? To have a whole hour where I'm talking about myself and my pain and having her just listen. The only way I can do that with her was to think that I was doing it to help one of you, to um, shed light on a similar experience that you've had, or to just offer it in some way of service, right? That was the only way I felt truly comfortable doing that with her. And, in our day to day friendship, we would just be texting each other and kind of like griping about whatever's going on in the day. But the podcast was a space where we really sat down, slowed down, and focused on one topic together. And it was one of the best parts of our friendship. And I will miss it. I'm really sad about it, and it's a huge loss, and I'm grieving it. I felt really seen and connected with her in here. And it feels weird to continue on without her. And I'm sure it's weird for all of you, but I think it's time for a change. So thank you so much, Little Helpers, for going on this huge journey together. And we're going to have so many more exciting episodes and topics and places, and God knows where my life is going to go. I mean, we're trying to find a surrogate right now for the second child, and building Cool of Mind and trying to be a entrepreneur after being just, a woman behind the scenes. So there's going to be so much ahead. So if you've appreciated the podcast for all of our 5 years before, or even if you're just jumping in and are here for this next phase, this next journey, please subscribe and leave a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And even better, share this with a friend. Talk to you soon. See you next week. By accessing this podcast, you acknowledge that the host of this podcast makes no warranty, guarantee, or representation as to the accuracy or sufficiency of information featured in this podcast. The information, opinions, and recommendations presented in this podcast are for general information purposes only, and any reliance on the information provided in this podcast is done at your own risk. This podcast and any and all content or services available on or through this podcast are provided for general, non-commercial informational purposes only, and do not constitute the practice of any medical or any professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and should not be considered or used as a substitute for the independent professional judgment, advice, diagnosis, or treatment of a duly licensed and qualified healthcare provider. In case of a medical emergency, you should immediately call 911. The host does not endorse, approve, recommend, or certify any information, product, process, service, or organization presented or mentioned in this podcast. And information from this podcast should not be referenced in any way to imply such approval or endorsement. Thank you.